Voicemail came in at 6:47 on a Tuesday morning, 3 days before Thanksgiving, while I was still in my pajamas waiting for my coffee to finish brewing. It was my stepmother. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was doing. She just said, "We're keeping the holidays small this year, family only." Then she hung up. I stood there holding my phone, staring at the little notification bar that said the message was 41 seconds long, even though she'd used maybe 8 of them. Family only. I'm 32 years old. I have a master's degree in estate law. I spent the last 6 years working at a firm that helps families untangle exactly the kind of mess that mine had been quietly becoming for a decade. And standing in my kitchen that morning, I understood, with the clean, cold clarity of someone who has seen this particular story play out in a dozen conference rooms, exactly what she meant. She didn't mean family only. She meant me excluded. She meant my father going along with it because he always goes along with it. She meant my half-brother, who is 19 and has never once been asked to give anything to anyone, would be there, and I would not. I set my phone face down on the counter. I poured my coffee. I sat at my kitchen table and I thought about my grandmother's house. My grandmother passed 8 months before that voicemail. She was 81, sharp until the very end, and she had lived in the same white clapboard farmhouse in rural Virginia since before my father was born. 4 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, 11 acres backing up to a creek. It had been in our family since the 1940s. I had spent every summer of my childhood there. I had learned to drive on that gravel driveway. I had sat on that porch every night for 3 weeks straight when she was dying, holding her hand and watching the fireflies come out over the field. My stepmother had been trying to get that property since the day she married my father. I knew what the house was worth. I knew because I had personally overseen my grandmother's estate documents. I had helped her draft the original will. I had sat with her attorney, who was also, quietly, my mentor, and made sure her wishes were airtight. My grandmother had not trusted my father's financial instincts for 30 years. She trusted me. But there was one problem. The will named my father as executor, not because my grandmother believed he would honor it perfectly, because she believed that a direct challenge to his authority would cause the kind of family war that would eat the estate alive in legal fees before a single decision got made. She was practical to her bones. She thought naming him executor would keep him cooperative. She miscalculated, because she hadn't fully accounted for my stepmother. Sometime in the 4 months after the funeral, while I was working 60-hour weeks and trusting my father to handle the estate administration the way he'd promised, my stepmother had gotten to him. I don't know what she said. I don't know what she promised. What I know is that by October, the house had been quietly appraised. By November, a real estate attorney in a different county had been engaged to manage a private sale, and nobody had told me. I found out the way I find out most things involving money that people are trying to hide. I looked at the paperwork, not because I was suspicious, because I'm an estate attorney and my grandmother had named me the secondary trustee on a small separate trust she'd set up for the property maintenance fund. It was a minor administrative rule, but it meant I received routine financial disclosures, and in one of those disclosures, in a line that was clearly meant to look like a routine expense, was a payment to a real estate appraisal firm. I know that firm. I've deposed their lead appraiser twice. They specialize in pre-sale assessments for estate properties. I sat with that document for a long time. Then I called my grandmother's original attorney, the one who'd helped draft everything, the one who had become something like a professional godmother to me over the years. Her name is Harriet. She has been practicing law in Virginia for 40 years, and she does not panic. "Tell me what you know," she said. I told her everything. The appraisal payment, the separate real estate attorney, the timing, the fact that my father had stopped returning my calls about estate administration 3 weeks earlier. Harriet was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How fast can you move?" That was October 14th. By October 21st, I had done 3 things. First, I had pulled every estate document, every trust instrument, every deed, every codicil my grandmother had ever signed. I read all of it again, slowly. The way you read something when you are looking for a door that someone forgot to lock. I found it on page 9 of the property trust amendment my grandmother had signed in her final year. There was a clause, one that my stepmother's attorney almost certainly hadn't read carefully, because it was written in the dry, technical language that non-specialists skim past. They gave the secondary trustee the right to petition for an emergency preservation order if the primary executor took any action that could result in the irreversible transfer of trust-adjacent property without secondary trustee consent. My grandmother hadn't put that clause in there by accident. I know that now. I think she put it there for exactly this moment, because she knew her son, and she knew me. Second, I called a property acquisition attorney in a different county and initiated an emergency lien on the farmhouse, citing potential breach of fiduciary duty by the executor. It froze the sale. It bought me time. Third, I called my own bank. My grandmother had left me a direct bequest in her will, not the house. My father was supposed to manage that through the estate. But a cash inheritance, held separately, that had cleared my account 4 months ago. I had been treating it like a sacred object. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't moved it. I hadn't spent a single dollar of it because it felt like spending her. The bequest was $310,000. The farmhouse was appraised at $510,000, which meant my stepmother's private buyer was almost certainly getting it for something close to that number. Maybe a little under, for a fast close. I looked up the name of the buyer's representative in the county records. I found the purchase agreement. The agreed sale price was $395,000. The buyer was putting down $80,000. I called my bank. I asked them what I could borrow against my existing assets, my salary, my retirement account, and my grandmother's bequest as collateral. The answer was enough. I want to be honest about something. I am not a reckless person. I am the person in every room who reads the fine print. I am the person who has watched 100 families destroy themselves fighting over real estate while attorneys collect fees from both sides. I know exactly what property disputes cost. I know exactly what it means to tie yourself financially to a piece of land. But I also knew what that house meant, and I knew what it would mean to my stepmother to sell it. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about erasing the last place that had ever belonged just to us, to my grandmother and my father and me, before she came along and started rearranging everything. She wanted to sell my grandmother's house to a stranger, so that the memory of who we were before her would have nowhere left to live. I wasn't going to let that happen. I submitted a competing offer on October 28th through my acquisition attorney. Full asking price. Cash equivalent financing, pre-approved. 30-day close. I didn't tell my father. I didn't tell my stepmother. I didn't tell my half-brother, who wouldn't have understood what was happening anyway. I told Harriet. She laughed low and satisfied and said, "Your grandmother would have done the same thing." The competing offer triggered a legal review period because of the existing lien and the fiduciary dispute. That meant neither sale could proceed without a probate court review, which meant my father had to respond to the court, which meant he had to acknowledge in writing that there was a contested action. He called me on November 2nd. It was the first time we'd spoken in 6 weeks. "What did you do?" he said. His voice had that particular quality it gets when he's been coached by my stepmother. Controlled, slightly wounded, framed to sound like I'd done something to him. I said, "I filed a legal action to protect Grandma's estate from a sale that violates the trust terms." "That house is going to be sold to pay estate debts," he said. I said, "There are no estate debts. I've seen the accounting. The estate closed in the black by $62,000. Silence. She wanted that money to go to. "Dad," I said, "I've read every document Grandma ever signed. Please don't tell me what she wanted." He hung up. The Thanksgiving voicemail from my stepmother came 9 days later. Family only, 41 seconds. I understand now that it was meant to rattle me, to make me feel like an outsider so I would back down, accept the exclusion, let the sale go through because fighting felt worse than losing. That's the thing about people who use emotional exclusion as a control tactic. They assume you want back in. They assume the invitation is the leverage. I hadn't wanted to be at that table for years. I just hadn't been willing to say so out loud until I was standing in my kitchen at 6:47 in the morning, watching the coffee drip into the pot, feeling nothing about the voicemail except a kind of quiet, settled relief. I wasn't going to their Thanksgiving. I was going to Harriet's office, review the probate court filing. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know who's out there listening to this. The probate hearing was scheduled for the first week of December. In the meantime, I did the thing I always do when I need to think clearly. I drove out to the farmhouse. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Grey sky. The fields had gone brown and the creek was running high from the November rains. I parked on the gravel drive and sat there for a minute before I got out. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I was just different. I walked up to the front porch and I had a key. Not because I'd taken anything, because my grandmother had given me a copy of her front door key on my 23rd birthday, wrapped in a note that said, "This house is yours too, always." I had carried it on my keychain for 9 years. I unlocked the door. I walked inside. It smelled like her, like cedar and old books and something faintly floral that I have never been able to identify and will probably spend the rest of my life looking for in candles that never quite match. On the kitchen table, there was a folder. I recognized my stepmother's handwriting on the tab. Inside was a staging plan, color swatches, a list of my grandmother's furniture marked as to donate or discard. Her mother's china, the set she brought from her own childhood home, was circled in red pen with the words, "Not worth keeping." I stood at that table for a long time. I took pictures of every page. I locked the house behind me. I drove back to the city and I sent the photos to Harriet. "Good," she said. "That's going to matter." The reason it mattered is this. An executor has a fiduciary duty to preserve estate assets until the estate is legally closed. The estate was not legally closed. The probate court had not yet issued a final distribution order, and yet my stepmother, who had no legal standing in the estate, none, she was not named anywhere in my grandmother's documents, had already been inside that house, going through my grandmother's belongings, marking items for disposal. Through my father's access, using his role as executor as a passkey to do things that were not his to authorize. That's not just bad judgment, that's a breach, and Harriet documented it. The probate hearing lasted 4 hours. My father came with a private attorney, a younger man who was clearly uncomfortable with how thoroughly Harriet knew the relevant case law. My stepmother sat in the gallery. She wasn't a party to the proceeding, but she came anyway, and she sat there the whole time with her arms crossed, watching. My father's attorney argued that the sale was necessary to satisfy outstanding estate obligations, and that my competing offer represented an improper interference by an interested party. Harriet responded with 3 things. First, the estate accounting showing a positive balance, no debt requiring a sale. Second, the staging folder I had photographed, demonstrating unauthorized disposition of estate assets by a non-party. Third, the trust clause granting me, as secondary trustee, the right to petition for exactly this kind of intervention. The judge was a woman in her 60s who had clearly been doing this long enough to have no patience for people who treated probate court like a negotiation table. She listened. She asked questions. She looked at the documents. Then she ruled. My father was removed as executor. Breach of fiduciary duty. The property sale he had initiated was voided. The estate was placed under independent administrator oversight for final distribution, and my competing offer, submitted properly through legal channels, was recognized as the valid purchase mechanism for the farmhouse, subject to a fair market review that confirmed my price was appropriate. My stepmother made a sound from the gallery. The judge looked at her over her reading glasses and said nothing. She didn't have to. My father didn't look at me when we filed out of the courtroom. His attorney gathered his papers quickly, the way attorneys do when they want to leave before anyone says something that becomes a problem. My stepmother caught up to me in the hallway. "You didn't vote anything, Maya. Didn't vote anything, Maya." I looked at her. I thought about my grandmother's china circled in red pen. I thought about 41 seconds of voicemail. I thought about the staging plan and the private buyer and the appraisal payment, hidden in a line item disclosure she didn't think I would read. I read the documents, I said. That's all I did. She started to say something else. I kept walking. There is one more thing I have to tell you because some of you are going to ask and you deserve the whole answer. My half-brother. He's 19. He didn't know about the staging plan. He didn't know about the private sale. He wasn't involved in the legal maneuvering, and when I found that out, confirmed it through my own investigation, I made a decision to leave him out of the legal action entirely. He's a kid. A kid with a mother who makes decisions for this family and a father who doesn't push back. That's not the same as being guilty of what they did. I'm not going to pretend he and I are close. We're not. I spent most of his childhood being treated like a guest in my own father's house, and he grew up watching that and learning it was normal. That's going to take a long time to unpack, if it ever gets unpacked at all. But he sent me a text 2 weeks after the hearing. It just said, "I didn't know what they were doing. I'm sorry." I haven't responded yet. I've been thinking about what to say. I think the answer is something like, "I know, and I'm not ready yet. But maybe someday." The farmhouse closed in January. My name is on the deed. I drove out there the day after closing, early, before the light was fully up, and I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched the frost burn off the fields in the morning sun. The creek was frozen. The trees were bare. The porch boards creaked the same way they always had, the loose one on the left side of the steps that my grandmother always meant to fix and never did. I didn't fix it either. Not yet. Some things you leave alone for a while. You let them stay the way someone you loved left them, just a little longer, before you decide what comes next. My phone buzzed twice while I sat there. I didn't check it. Whatever it was, it could wait. I was on my porch. I had coffee. The sun was coming up over my grandmother's field. There was a voicemail waiting when I finally looked. My stepmother, not asking, demanding that I return the china and several other items she claimed were personal property, not estate assets. I forwarded it to Harriet. Then I blocked the number. I haven't been back to my father's house. I haven't been invited. I'm not sure I would go if I were. Some doors close so quietly you don't even hear them, and you only realize they're shut when you stop reaching for the handle. My grandmother always said that the hardest thing about family is learning the difference between the people who love you and the people who just need something from you. She said most families spend their whole lives confusing the two. She was right. She usually was. I keep her key on my keychain still, the same one she gave me on my 23rd birthday. But now when I use it, it opens my front door, and I think that's exactly what she intended. There's a loose board on the left side of the porch steps. My grandmother always meant to fix it and never did. I haven't fixed it either. Every time I step over it, I think about what it means to leave certain things the way someone you loved left them. Not because you can't change them, but because you're not ready to yet. I've thought a lot about why everything played out the way it did. Not in a mystical sense, just in the plain, clear-eyed way you think about cause and effect when you've spent years professionally untangling what happens when people act without integrity. My stepmother made a series of choices. She saw an asset. She saw an executor she could influence. She saw a stepdaughter she assumed was too sentimental or too distracted to pay attention. Every one of those assumptions was a calculation, and every one of them was wrong, not because the universe punished her for being greedy, but because the actions she chose created consequences she hadn't fully traced. She didn't read the trust documents carefully. She didn't account for the secondary trustee clause. She didn't consider that the person she was trying to outmaneuver had spent 6 years doing exactly this kind of work for a living. She moved fast and assumed I wouldn't move faster. That's what I keep coming back to. The outcome wasn't luck. It wasn't fate. It was the direct result of choices, hers and mine, playing out to their natural ends. My grandmother used to say that the only real protection you have in this world is knowing more than the person trying to take something from you. I used to think that was a little cynical. Now I understand she was talking about something deeper than strategy. She was talking about the kind of clarity that comes from doing your homework, from understanding your own situation well enough that nobody can misrepresent it to you. That's not cynicism. That's care. Caring enough about your own life to understand it. I think about Harriet too. The way she said, "How fast can you move?" Without flinching, without hedging, without a single wasted word. There's a kind of courage in that. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind, where you've done the work and you trust what you know and you act on it even when the stakes are personal. Even when the other party is your own father. Even when part of you still wishes things were different. I won't pretend this ended in a way that feels entirely clean. My father and I haven't spoken since the hearing. My half-brother sent one text and I still haven't answered it. The farmhouse is mine, but the family I grew up imagining, the one that would have gathered there for holidays, the one my grandmother always hoped for, that family doesn't exist, and maybe never did. Winning the legal battle didn't fix that. I don't think anything will. But I sit on that porch now, in the mornings, with my coffee, and I watch the light change over the fields my grandmother loved. And I feel something I don't have a perfect word for. Not happiness, exactly. More like solidity. Like I am standing on ground that is actually mine, holding something I actually earned, living a life that is actually true. My grandmother gave me a key on my 23rd birthday. She said, "This house is yours too, always." I think she knew long before I did that the key she was really giving me wasn't made of metal.